Thank you very much, Mr. Eklund, for your contribution both today and in your submission that we've read. Just on that, on the latter one, you subsequently, I presume, read today's business paper and the comments from staff. Is there anything that you'd like to raise with regard to those comments about your submission? I mean, you did raise three very important issues: the extension of Living's Playground to stage 2 and the issue of car parking, where it's impossible to provide, or nearly impossible in some cases, as well as the issues of the cost of development in Gunnedah. Is there anything you'd like to respond to in the staff response to your submission?
I guess only what I've already said about how I believe the Living Space extension does form part of the currently adopted open space strategy. That the car parking provisions that did say in the business paper that would warranted further consideration. And the developer contributions, I think, does need a bit more review than the comments that are made in relation to how other councils are treating their headworks and providing an acceptable level of service at a much lower cost.
Are there any further questions, councillors? Thank you, Ms. Egan. We appreciate you coming and representing your point of view to our council. Councillors, we'll now move on to our next item, which is our minutes, or no minutes, which I'm sure you'll all be very pleased to know for our June ordinary meetings. So we'll move on to the General Manager's report, starting with item 9.1, the Egan Memorial Project, and I'll hand to our General Manager, Mr. Groff, to detail his recommendation report.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, councillors and those listening at home, and gallery members. This recommendation is seeking council support up to the value of $10,000 to recognise a former Gunnedah resident, Annie Egan, who gave the ultimate sacrifice in service to her country and passed away from Spanish flu. Pleased to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Groff. On that call, an elected member to move the recommendation. Become a motion. I'm happy to do so, Mr. Chair. Councillor, wait a second. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Haslam, do you wish to speak tonight?
Well, I think the General Manager has given a good outline of the reason why Alan Miles, OEM, has chosen or targeted this particular event as for Gunnedah. He has done about, he and other members of the Children's Projects team have identified about 35 other cases across the nation in various states for recognition, and some of them VC holders, others who've got the seed up over previous recognition. So the fact that this one had been identified, of course, previously in the local paper, I think our local former editor, Rocky McLean, had done a feature on her quite a few years ago, and I think there's a more recent one done also in the local paper. So it's a very obvious case of someone who had died as a result of not injury, but Spanish flu, caught from soldiers returning from World War I, only lasted a few days in the quarantine stations in North Sydney. So a very deserving, and a family, of course, two of her sisters learned the existence of controversy here, and they have a family owned property out in Emerald Hill at the time. So there's been good support from local business to support this process, including one firm who was offered to lift the identified large boulder out on the Corolla park site and lift it off at the site chosen next to the War Memorial, next to the history headquarters, the old Border Cow Museum in Anzac Park, a most appropriate site. That's just an example of the support that's been received. And he has, Mr. Miles has just recently announced that a very important visitor will be coming to Gunnedah make that presentation here. There will be another plaque laid in the quarantine station in Sydney on her death. The date that they've chosen for this one in Gunnedah is her birth date, the 21st and 22nd of August. Sir Peter Cosgrove, former Governor General from 2014 to 19, and Chief of Defence Forces from 2002 to 2005, will be in Gunnedah, as well as a number of other senior former service officers. And I think it's a very appropriate event to support as a council, and I think that figure that the General Manager put will well and surely probably pay the costs that we would be looking at, on top of the considerable donations made by other members of our community.
Thank you, Councillor Haslett. I'd like to maybe like to speak against the motion or ask a question. Councillor Porter is the second on the motion. Just to speak. Be the case for the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? That motion carried. Moving on, item 9.2, debt recovery policy review. I'll hand back to General Manager, Mr. Brock, for detailed recommendation.
Going through you, Mr. Mayor, as per the workshop this afternoon with councillors, this is seeking the endorsement of the draft policy, debt recovery policy for exhibition for a period of 21 days, and should there may be submissions and subsequent adoption by council. Noting the conversation of the workshop, I do flag that it may be that a councillor wishes to move an amendment to include some changes to that draft policy for exhibition.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. I call on elected member to move the recommendation that you see before you.
Having to move the recommendation, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Swain. Do I have a seconder to that motion? Councillor Campbell. So the motion reads as the recommendations put before you that the draft debt recovery policy be adopted in place of an exhibition for a period of 21 days. A comment, and should no submissions be received, the policy be adopted. That is the motion that has been, the recommendation that has been passed as the motion. Councillor Swain, do you wish to speak to that motion?
Just very quickly, Mr. Mayor, we've had a workshop earlier this afternoon, and I'm sure all councillors understand the intent of the amended policy. From our perspective, we are keen to support our community in the best way possible while being sensible managers of the community's financial resources. So I think this is a good step in the right direction to try and support people who are having difficulties. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Swain. I'll now call for a elected member who'd like to speak against the motion. Ask a question. Councillor Campbell is the second on the motion. Do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
That'll be the case, councillors. Now put the motion on the vote.
Aye.
Against? Declare the motion carried. Moving on. Next item is item 9.3, investments. I'll hand back to Mr. Brock to detail that recommendation.
Councillors, this report from our capable finance team simply notifies the balance of $64.9 million at the end of the prior month, and please take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Brock. I'm going to call for elected member to move the recommendation becomes a motion. Thank you, Councillor Fuller, seconded by Councillor Moses. Councillor Fuller, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I need to say congratulations to the four senior staff that have worked on that project. Thank you very much, and great work.
I would like to member, I'd like to ask a question or speak against that great motion that we note the financial position councillor in. Councillor Moses, second on the motion, wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Be the case, then, put the motion on vote. Against? The motion unanimously supported, and I'll thank Mr. Brock for his contribution to our ordinary meeting council in June. Next on our agenda, councillors, are the Director of Corporate and Community Services reports. I'll call on Mr. Foreman to detail his recommendation, starting at item 10.1, increase in capital budget for chamber technology upgrade. Thank you, Mr. Foreman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, councillors, this report concerns a proposal to rescope current project to replace the audio and microphone equipment in the chambers, and the proposal is that we allocate additional funding to that project to incorporate audio and visual requirements and beyond the increasing demand we have for broadcasting council meetings, as well as having online meetings in the council chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. I'll now call on the elected member to move that recommendation. Thank you, Councillor Hook, and seconded by Councillor Hook. Councillor Hook has moved the motion. Do you wish to speak to that motion?
Only very briefly, Mr. Mayor. I think that it's inevitable that we have to proceed down this path. Certainly the last 14 months of COVID has proven the fact that Zoom meetings are here to stay, and also the Office of Local Government really urging us to go away from just audio to video streaming as well. So I think it's timely that we spend the money and upgrade to modern facilities. Thank you.
Elected member would like to speak against the motion. Ask the question of the officer. Councillor Bevan seconded the motion.
Mr. Mayor, and through you, I'd just like to say g'day to everyone in live streaming land and really congratulate the staff for what we've done so far and managing the technology that we have to live stream this. I certainly note that I think the audience that gives me feedback from watching from the virtual gallery has trebled since we started video streaming, and I've already earlier in today's meeting received more than one text message from people asking, oh, why is the live stream not working? We have a glitch. So it's excellent to see more members of our community and not just my parents watching the meeting and interested in seeing what's going on.
Councillors, I'm not going to put that motion, so all in favour? Against? The motion carries unanimously. Moving on to item 10.2, which is Local Government Remuneration Tribunal. Then I'll hand back to Mr. Foreman to detail the recommendation reports.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor. In summary, the recommendation is that the 2% increase that's been ordered by the Local Government Remuneration Tribunal be applied to the mayoral and council allowances.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. I'll now call elected member to move the recommendation to become the motion. Thank you, Councillor Luke, and seconded by Councillor Hall. Councillor Luke, do you wish to speak to this motion? Sorry, Councillor Luke, yes.
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think, I will make a comment. I do believe still that there is a problem with the extensive range of remuneration for councillors, especially for mayors. The work that you do is equal to the work of anybody from, or the mayor of this council does, from anybody from a much larger regional city. So I do think that we have to take these increased offerings anytime they're offered to actually try and reduce the extent of the difference between the various categories. A bit of a muddled comment, but I do recommend to my other councillors that they do vote in favour of this.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question? Councillor Swan.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to throw the cat among the pigeons and say I vehemently vote against this because I won't be here next time.
Thank you, Councillor Swain. I'll ask you to refrain from playing up any council member. Now, I call on the second of the motion. Councillor wishes to speak to the motion.
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
In the case, then I put the motion. All in favour? Against? That motion carried. Moving on to item 10.3, which is 2017 to 2022 delivery program and 21 to 22 operational plan. I'll hand to Mr. Foreman to detail the recommendations, and councillors, you will recall that Ms. Yickman spoke just recently or made a presentation to council in relation to this item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, this report is the adoption of the delivery plan and the operational plan, and putting it forward. I'd like to acknowledge the work of the staff behind the scenes in putting such a big document together, the finance staff and Ms. Mark, who does a lot of effort putting a lot of information from across the organisation together every year. The recommendation is that we adopt the 2017 to 2022 delivery program and operational plan, incorporating the statement of revenue policy and fees and charges schedule, and that we make and levy all rates, fees and charges for the 21-22 financial year as detailed in the statement of revenue policy and operational plan, fees and charges schedule containing the 21-22 operational plan.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. I now call elected member who'd like to move the recommendation to become a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move this recommendation, that is the two officers' recommendations plus the following three. First one, number 3, that staff investigate the need and value that could be provided by a car parking contribution scheme and report back to council the outcomes of the investigation.
Councillor, is there a timeline for that?
Well, I know they started pretty well under the pump at the moment, so I don't want to sort of make it, certainly, probably not by the time of the end of this council term, but that doesn't mean to say that things don't flow on as we well know, so I won't put it, I don't think I should put a limit on it at the moment, but I'd rather like to see it come forward soon. The second, sorry, where do I go to? Outcome of the investigation. Number 4 was that a concept plan and costings for stage 2 Libby's Place, including a water play park, to be prepared. And 5 would be that the creation of an improved, upgraded skate park be included in the consideration of the open spaces strategy.
Councillor Hazel, if I could just ask you to please look at the screen and confirm that you're happy with the wording, that they are your words in that motion.
Your upgraded skate park, this might be improved, upgrade.
Do you want both words, upgraded and improved?
Yes, upgraded and improved. I'm sorry, I made it clear.
In the new open space strategy or in the?
Of the new, yes, in the new open space strategy.
So you can confirm, Councillor Hazel, that those words are as your intended motion. I'll now call for a seconder to that. Thank you, Councillor Luke has seconded that motion. So Councillor Hazel, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, yes, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the opportunity, Council. I think the issue of number 3, the staff investigate the need and value that can be provided by the car parking contributions has been raised by Mr. Foreman in his report. So really, I'm only putting that recommendation into the form, into the motion. And I think it's something that's also was highlighted by Mr. Hickman, that we do have situations in our towns at the moment, particularly in the CBD, where it is almost impossible to supply parking spaces physically on the site. So it seems to me to be the most appropriate that we probably take a financial contribution in lieu. But we're not making that decision here. We're just looking at staff will be investigating further and providing a report back. The next 2, I initially was going to put them into one, and they've been included in the considerations of the open spaces strategy. But I know I'm one, I think there might be others around this table, have been somewhat frustrated by the length of time this open spaces strategy is coming to fruition. I have no guarantee that it'll see the light of day before the end of this council term, and I'm concerned about that because we started 12 or 18 months ago. And some of these things that are happening in our community, like a golden free leash area, etc., can't happen until we get this result, So I was reluctant to put both of them into just say, well, this should do with the open spaces strategy. So that's why I've split them. I think, and Mr. Hickman pointed out, I think quite rightly, that under the present 2010 strategy, we can adopt something at the second stage 2, and it was part of the discussions that the working group had dealt with for some over the last 5 or so, leading up to the opening of stage 1. So I think it's already been sort of accepted that there would be a stage 2 when and if we could identify grant funds. Now, if we don't get it in to this policy now, we wouldn't be able to apply, in my understanding, we wouldn't be able to apply for grant funding as a unfunded project. And so if we do adopt this, get the planning and costing, we can make an application for that for those grant funding. So that would be my reason why I separated it. And then the fifth one, that the creation of an improved, upgraded skate park be included in consideration of the open spaces strategy. Yes, I think our skate park is quite popular, but it does lack the facilities and the many other skate parks around. And if you only have to drive through Tamworth at the moment, with massive development on either side. Now, we can't keep up with them. I'm not saying we should keep up with them, but not even having a toilet block, the amenity close by, they've got to go into the showground, etc. I think it was an oversight when we put it there. It was back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and so I think we can, and it's not saying we're going to do it, but I'm sure we're asking you to be put into that open spaces strategy so that whenever we get to that level of discussion, which I hopefully we'll see in the foreseeable future, it can be discussed. So I urge to council to support the motion now with 5 parts.
Thank you, Councillor House. I'll now call for elected member if you'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question before I refer to council. When to second the motion, Councillor here.
I have a question, and I'm certainly not speaking against.
Could I just interrupt for a moment? Councillor Campbell has pointed out to me that there were the words, I didn't check, included in the consideration. Consideration should be in the fifth point. Sorry.
After included for consideration.
Look, I'm going to allow point 5. It's not relevant to the original discussion or motion that was before us, but I believe there was mention about the skate park as part of one of the submissions that were put forward. So we'll allow that. Councillor Lucas is seconded to that motion. You're okay with the modification of the word?
I am, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Keith, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you a question, which I suspect might be for the Director of Infrastructure Services. In your response to the developer contributions component of Ms. Egan's submission, you made a comment that one of the main reasons or drivers behind Tamworth having lesser developer servicing charges is that they have lower demand for utility services, especially water. Are you able to expand on that? Is it as simple as people in Tamworth use less water than people in Gunnedah?
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe, for the question, and through you, Mr. Mayor. As a very high-level summary, yes, that's correct. Tamworth's equivalent tenement is approximately 230 litres of water per property or per person per day, whereas Gunnedah is closer to 400. So that results in obviously larger pipe work being required because in order to service that development, and it's essentially a cultural way that our community uses water in terms of the volume of water that's used. The primary difference there is that our neighbours done a significant amount of work on water sustainability to try and decrease the amount of water per household that gets used, which obviously results in less significant infrastructure required to reticulate that water. Councillor.
Supplementary question on the same vein, does that same effect flow onto the other areas of headworks charges, or is it really need to work?
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe, for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. No, that particular doesn't, it flows onto the sewer requirement, but it doesn't flow on through other areas. The primary difference between Gunnedah and Tamworth from the stormwater perspective, you will have noticed in this Egan's table that there's no charge for stormwater in Tamworth. The reason for that is because it's calculated based on the actual infrastructure, trunk infrastructure needed to service the individual development at that local government area, as opposed to a charge applied on average per lot developed within a DSP area in Gunnedah. The advantage of that setup, the setup that we have here, is that it provides developers certainty early on the development process. So if they know how many the lot yield from the development, they know what the cost is going to be, without having to actually invest significant money in detailed design. There's been significant moves and noise I'm well aware of from the development industry in Tamworth. They actually prefer that level of certainty as opposed to having to invest a significant chunk of money up front to actually work out what those requirements will be.
Councillor Luke is the second to the motion.
No, I think all my thoughts have already been espoused by Councillor Castlett.
I'll now call for elected member if you'd like to ask a further question before I put the motion. Councillor Swan.
Yes, Mr Mayor, just a question, I guess, to staff, and I don't know whether there's any member of the staff well, I know there's no member of staff here as old as I am, but I can remember when we used to have a car parking contribution, and we decided, and Councillor Fuller will remember, not even as you know as old as I am, and I can remember that the reason why we abolished that car parking contribution was to provide support for our business owners regarding the cost that encompassed them when they needed a development or something, they had to pay so much towards the car parking contribution. So it's interesting to know that what goes around comes around. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Swain. Councillors, I'll now put the motion on favour. Against? Declare that motion carried. Moving on to item 10.4, outstanding resolution register. I'll hand back to Mr. Bourne.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the outstanding resolution register is presented with the information of councillors, with recommendation being the information to receive and noted.
Thank you, Mr. Bourne. And our corporate elected member to move the recommendation to become the motion. Councillor Swain has moved. Councillor Moses second. Councillor Swain, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Our elected member would like to ask a question or speak against the motion. Councillor Luke.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm the Director of Infrastructure Services. With respect to that open space strategy, timing of all of that, because we're going to come into the end of the term and there's a few long outstanding resolutions. When are we likely to see that process, the next steps be taken?
Thank you, Councillor Luke, for the question, and through you, Mr Mayor. Staff have been working on reviewing that draft strategy, and we're planning on bringing our report to council to put that draft strategy on public exhibition at the July council meeting.
Thank you.
No call for any further questions or comments.
Mr. Chairman, item 16.03/21, the voluntary planning agreement, I have been told, this letter was sent 3 months ago. We received a response, and are we expecting a response sooner rather than later?
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and through you, I'll take that question. Essentially, Whitehaven have acknowledged our letter, and there's been a meeting, a very preliminary meeting between the General Manager and myself and representatives of Whitehaven and Corolla in the last week or so, that have come to the table to commence the discussion about it. So I guess formally, no, we haven't received a letter in response, but we have had a conversation.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr Mayor, just to Mr Johnson's comments, the reason for the delay from the proponent in part is that they're awaiting the outcome of the court case concerning a development before they had any further discussions on that BPA matter.
Councillor Moses, second of the motion, you wish to speak?
No, thank you.
Move the case for the motion on favour. Against? Declare the motion carried. Councillors, I now direct you to the late report, the Corporate Director of Corporate Community Services report in relation to the training centre fit out. I'll hand back to Mr. Foreman to detail the recommendation in 2 parts for you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and apologies, councillors, for the late report. This report deals with the reallocation of existing budgets for the fit out of the Elgin Street Training Centre as office space. Council is pretty aware of some of the space pressures we have on this building, and the Elgin Street Training Centre reallocation is seen as a way to have a medium-term solution to that space problem, pending the investigation of a longer-term solution. Recommendation is in the report, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. Now call for the member to move the recommendation to come to the motion. Thank you, Councillor Fuller, seconded by Councillor Campbell. Councillor Fuller, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, thanks, Mr Mayor.
No call for the member. I'd like to ask a question or speak against the motion. Councillor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and through you to the Director. That space is extremely valuable at the moment for other meetings. subcommittee meetings, etc. Do we have a plan of somewhere else for those meetings to be conducted, notwithstanding the fact that you do need space?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor, for the question. It's not ideal. It's a band-aid solution, but the plan is that the committee room, which you remember from earlier in your term, which was repurposed, will become vacant. We do a reshuffle, and we would gain the committee room, which is a much smaller room, but it will cater for most of the meetings that would normally take place in the training centre. And for bigger meetings, we make use of the other council venues at the cultural precinct, such as the Smithhurst Theatre, the Town Hall, and the Creative Arts Gallery and Meeting Room.
Thank you.
Councillor Campbell, is the second of the motion to speak.
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Hawke actually asked my questions.
Councillors, are there any further questions or comments before I put the motion? Councillor Swan.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, just a quick comment, and it's following along a little bit from what Councillor Hawke was saying about the, I guess, the pressure that staff are under with such a small amount of space in this whole building. I'd be encouraging the new council to start to think about what we're going to do, because we can't keep using every little separate room. I think we've got almost to the bursting point. So we're hoping that the new council can think a bit further ahead and start to consider what we need to do as a council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Swan. Councillors, on that, put this motion on the favour. Against? Motion carried. Thank you, Mr. Foreman, for your contribution. We'll now move on to Director of Planning and Environmental Services reports. I'm calling Mr. Johns to detail his recommendations, starting with item 11.1, dissolution of the Waste and Recycling Services Working Group. Thank you, Mr. Johns.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and through you, councillors, as you would have read in the report, this report seeks support from council for the dissolution of the Waste and Recycling Services Group. And the basis of that recommendation is that the work that group was put together to undertake has been completed. So our plan, should the council agree with the recommendation, would be for them to have their final meeting on the 4th of August, which will be a wrap-up. New contracts will be in place and will be in place for about a month by then. So we're seeking to dissolve that working group.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. And our call for a member to move the recommendation. Thank you, Councillor Haslett. You've moved the motion. Do I have a second to the motion? Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Haslett, you get to speak to the motion.
Just to say, Mr. Chairman, I don't often like to dissolve myself, but I must admit that we've seen the rollout in the last couple of weeks, and I congratulate council staff for that rollout now taking place of the new bins, and hopefully when it settles down July on and under the new system, that we have an improved system, and I congratulate the staff and my two fellow councillors who've worked on that committee over the last 12 months, or however long it's been, 2 years, so it's, to get to where we are today. It was very interesting. There will be further challenges for council down the track, but that'll be for another committee or another working group to resolve. Thank you very much.
I'll now call for a member who'd like to ask a question or make a comment. Councillor Hawke, is a second to the motion. Mr. Stewart.
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
That being the case, councillors, put this motion on the favour.
Aye.
Against? Let the motion carry. I will now move on to item 11.2, which is rebate of unspent portion of the 2020-21 Animal Control Community Program. I'll call back on Mr. Johns to detail the recommendation.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through this report seeks the rebate of unspent allocation of animal control budget, specifically around community programs and events from the current financial year to next financial year. It's essentially to finalise awareness education program that's commenced later in the year.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. Now call for the member. Thank you, Councillor Campbell has moved that motion and seconded by Councillor Moses. Councillor Campbell, you wish to speak to the motion as moved.
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So I'd like to member who'd like to ask a question or speak against the motion. Councillor Moses, second the motion, Mr. Speaker.
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Being the case, I'll put the motion on the favour. Against? That motion carried. Moving on to item 11.3, 2020 to 2021 capital rollover and return to general fund and unexpended budget transfer. And I'll hand back to Mr. Johnson to detail that recommendation.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And through you again, the report seeks a capital rollover of funds in the Building Environment Strategic Projects budget. As outlined in the report, there's various allocations and various reasons why we're seeking this to be rolled. It also fortuitously seeks to return $7,000 to the general fund. Also, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. I now call for the member move that recommendation become the motion.
I'm happy to do that. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Hassan, and seconded by Councillor Hassan. Do you wish to speak to the motion?
Only to the extent that, like before, it's good to see money going back, but more importantly, it's very good to see the trees growing very well down there, as we saw in other parts driving around in our children's day.
Do I have an member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a further question? Councillor Hall is the second to the motion. Do you wish to speak to the motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Be the case for the motion, all in favour?
Aye.
Against? Motion carried. Moving right along, item 11.4, rollover of unspent budget from the crime development and planning, and I'll hand back to Mr. Johnson to detail the recommendation.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. That's easy for you to say. Councillors, this relates to, again, another rollover, as the Mayor said, in the development and planning professional services budget. Essentially, it is to allow for some staff training to occur in the next financial year. And it's also, as we read in the report, to allow, I guess, a bolstering of professional services budget. So from time to time, we require specialist legal and planning advice, and there's potential for there to be some matters next year that will require a few more dollars in that budget. We do rely on that, the budget. Basically, it's a, I guess you'd say it's a pretty thin budget from year to year, and we make do with that. So essentially, we don't want to expend all that money on one matter next year and not have money in the budget to seek that advice as recommended.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. Now, population member to move the recommendation to become a motion. Thank you, Councillor Swain, seconded by Councillor Hook. Councillor Swain has moved the motion. Do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I'd like to member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question. Councillor Hook is the second of the motion. Do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Seems pretty plain and simple. Then I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Motion carried. Moving on to item 11.5, development application number 2020/008. And I'll hand back to Mr. Johnson to detail that recommendation.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you, this report is obviously a development application involving 59 lot subdivision. The property is known as 20 Sunnyside Farm Drive and also 110 Lincoln Street in Gunnedah. As we read in the report, the application includes the extension of services, including water, sewer, and road infrastructure. The application also seeks a number of variations to Council's development control plan. The first of those is total area of easements on created lots. This variation is supported given that the servicing strategy has already been approved for an early stage, which is consistent with that. It also seeks variation to the frontage to depth ratio for one lot, being lot 531. Again, this variation is supported as the adjoining lot and road configuration has already been approved. And finally, the application seeks a variation to road widths, and again, it's the reason for that is that they're consistent with previously approved road widths that I guess feed this development. I will make one note, and I have spoken to Ms. Markey about this. Condition B4 will not require a fire train; it will require a fire trail. So I have asked Mrs. Markey just to tweak that condition B4 there. Apologies for that time.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. And Councillor Hasler has moved that recommendation to now become Councillor Hook, a motion, so I'll call on a second. Councillor Hasler, maybe you'd like to say your motion. Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe has seconded the motion. Councillor Hook, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to say that it's exciting to have quite a large development project going ahead in this community. We know that housing is a real shortage problem here, and hopefully that will inspire some people to build some homes and give people the opportunity to either remain in the town or attract some further residents to the community. It's certainly a great start, and I'm also excited that it may force the kangaroos back a little bit further and not eat our front and backyard. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hook. I now call for a elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question.
The question, Mr. Chairman. I like Councillor Hook, although I don't look like him, despite what people just said. We'd like to see this development go ahead. It's been in the advanced stage for a while. But just in terms of stage 6, I understand we'll have a crossing across the what is actually watercourse and drainage. I haven't seen reference in here to what sort of crossing would be. Maybe I missed it. That rather the director of infrastructure or director of planning. Is there going to be or does that come later? Will we get that the plans later of what's going to be the crossing where that road is going to go? Because there will, at times, quite a bit of water comes down the watercourse.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you, just taking the lead from Mr. Hudson, it's a wee bit pipe culvert designed to be suitable for that space and given the water coming down.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe is the second in the motion. You wish to speak? Are there any further questions or comments, councillors, before I put the motion? No? For the motion, all in favour?
Aye.
Against? Let that motion carry. Moving on to item 11.6, funds transferred for NIQUIP 2021, and I'll hand back Mr. Johnson to detail that recommendation.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you, councillors, this report seeks the transfer of $10,500 from the Economic Development Community Programs and Events from 2021 financial year to 21-22 to assist with the delivery of the 2021 NIQUIP event, and that includes a road closure as well. Councillor O'Keefe, I guess you would like to move the recommendation to become a motion. Fantastic. Do I have a second to that motion? Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe, would you like to speak to that motion?
Look, contrary to one of my fellow councillors' concerns, I'm indeed very well, and I was just saving my energy to positively jump out of my skin and salivate verbally over how excited I am for NIQUIP and ANQUIP coming up this year after a forced hiatus last year. I'm sure I'm not the only person in the community who's ecstatic to see it coming back, and can't wait to get out there no matter how cold it is in here.
May I call for a member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question? Councillor Fuller is the second on the motion. Do you wish to speak? No celebration? Okay. That being the case, then councillors are going to put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Okay, the motion carried. Moving on to item 11.7, which is also the last report from Mr. Johns. Reallocation of funds in economic development. And I'll hand back to Mr. Johns to detail the recommendation.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you, this report is fairly self-explanatory, councillors, but I'll just do a brief, summary of it. Essentially seeking revote funds from the Welcome to Gunnedah initiatives of $2,500. A transfer of funds in order to promote the investment prospectus that we've already developed. And it also, probably interestingly, councillors seeks to roll out $20,000, which was earmarked for international engagement strategy. But there's, I guess, been a recommendation from staff that we pivot towards an investment attraction strategy, given the uncertainty internationally at this time. It's not to say that we can't investigate that later on, but at this point in time, we believe that money would be better spent, trying to really sell Gunnedah predominantly domestically at this stage.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. Now, I would like the member to move the recommendation become the motion. Anyone? Councillor Luke. Councillor Fuller, second to the motion. Councillor Luke, would you like to speak to the motion as the mover of the motion?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I now call for the member who'd like to ask a question or speak against the motion. Councillor Fuller is the second on the motion. Wish to speak? Being the case, I'll put the motion on favour. Against? The motion carried. Thank you, Mr. Johns, for your contribution to our ordinary June meeting. Moving on to the next item, which is Director of Infrastructure Services reports, and I'll call on Mr. Bartlett to detail his recommendation, starting with item 12.1, a request to transfer funding. Over to you, Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, the purpose of this report is to seek Council's approval for the transfer of funding for capital works programs for depot lighting to accommodate for the unforeseen premature failures of the depot ice machine and upgrade specified lighting that does not qualify for capitalisation.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. I'll now call for a elected member to move the recommendation to become the motion. Thank you, Councillor Swain, and seconded by Councillor Campbell. Councillor Swain, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Now call on an elected member who would like to speak against the motion and ask a question. Councillor Campbell is the second on the motion. Wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Case, the motion, all in favour? Against? Okay, the motion carried. Moving on to item 12.2, which is Crime Reserve Improvement Fund project nomination, and I'll hand back to Mr. Bartlett to detail the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, the purpose of this report is to seek Council's endorsement to submit the upgrade of the Mullally Park toilet block, the Carroll Park toilet block, and the Hamilton Park boundary fence for grant funding under the Crown Reserve Improvement Fund.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. Thank you, Councillor Fuller has moved that motion and seconded by Councillor Moses. Councillor Fuller has moved the motion. Wish to speak to the motion?
No, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
I'll now call for elected member who would like to speak against the motion or ask a question. Councillor Moses, as the second of the motion, you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Just before I put this motion, councillors, I'd certainly like to add my support to what's been put forward. You will all recall over previous years we've had some really good success with this particular fund, and that has really helped us to see the upgrades to especially our showground. So I think these are all very worthy and well selected potential projects for our community. If we are to be successful, I think it would certainly benefit the villages as well, which I personally feel is a great outcome for our community. So I will support him, and I hope you do too. In saying that, councillors, I'm now going to put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? That motion carried. Moving on, item 12.3, capital rollover, civic air conditioner replacement. I'll leave back to Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and through you. The purpose of this report is to seek Council's endorsement to roll over and combine the civic air conditioner replacement and remaining funds for the 2021 air conditioning replacement program.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. Now call for the member to move that recommendation to become the motion. Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Seconded, Councillor Luke. Councillor Fuller, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, thanks, Mr Mayor.
Do I have a elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question? Councillor Luke is the second. Do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
In the case of the motion, all in favour? Aye. Against? Declare that motion carried. Moving right along, item 12.4, councillors. We have the next item is 2021 Local Government New South Wales Water Management Conference. I'm going to ask Mr. Bartlett to talk to the motion first, and then I'll call for nominations before I put the call out for elected member to move the recommendation to become the motion. Thank you, Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and through you. The purpose of this report is to invite Council to nominate a councillor to attend the Local Government New South Wales Water Management Conference for 2021, being held at the Crossing Theatre, Narrabri, from the 7th to the 9th of July.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. I'll now call for nominations for a councillor to attend the water conference. Councillor Fuller.
Could I nominate Councillor Campbell, please?
Councillor Campbell, do you accept the nomination? I'll now call for any further nominations to see if it's contested for the position. One further call for any further nominations. Councillor Campbell, congratulations. You will be council's representative at the water conference. I'll now call for elected member to move that recommendation to become the motion. Thank you, Councillor Hawke, and seconded by Councillor Moses. Councillor Hawke, do you wish to speak to the motion as mover?
Only to congratulate Councillor Campbell, and I think he's a great representative of this council. He does great work in that space, and it's a pleasure to see him continue on.
I'll now call for elected member who'd like to speak against that motion or ask a question. Councillor Moses, seconded. Do you wish to speak?
No, thank you.
In the case that I will put the motion on the favour. Against? For those listening at home, it was unanimously supported. Thank you, Mr. Bartlett, for your contribution to the ordinary meeting of council. Councillors, the next item is 13, which is reports to committees. There are no reports, so we'll move on to delegates reports. The first one that we have, and we do have several reports to council, is item 14.1, which is a 77th National Conference of the Murray-Darling Association that was held from the 16th to the 19th of May. Councillors, this report has been put forward by Councillor Campbell, so I might just ask Councillor Campbell if you'd like to speak to the motion. I'm sure you've been moving the motion as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor, and I will be moving the motion. This conference was the first time in the history of the Murray-Darling Association that was actually booked out. They had to knock people back from going to it. So, Murray-Darling Association is a very worthwhile organisation in the state or in the country, because it covers the whole Murray-Darling basin, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, and ACT, and basically South Australia as well. So, yeah, it's, you were there in attendance with me, and we both learned a hell of a lot, especially about the Menindee Lakes, as can be seen in the report. I just take on great pleasure in moving that motion.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. I'll call for a second to the motion. Thank you, Councillor Moses. I'll now call on elected member who'd like to ask any questions of Councillor Campbell or myself in relation to the conference. Councillor Moses, do you wish to speak at all as a second to the motion? No, will that be the case? Then councillors are going to put the motion on the table.
Aye.
Against, motion carried. Moving on to the next item, which is 14.2, Association Mining Related Councils meeting that was held in Gunner on the 20th and 21st of May. We had a report to us by Councillor Hasler, and I'd now like to head over to Councillor Hasler. If you'd like to speak to the report.
Well, just a couple of extra points to what I've made there. I think it's a very valuable exercise in going and looking at some of the projects, energy projects happening in our Shire area. Admittedly, of course, the first one, Walls Creek Mine, not directly in our local government area, but it's had a significant impact in terms of numbers of workers, etc. But to see the size of the operation, etc., is, I think, sort of something which we need to keep in mind. We had a quick drop in at Currambee on the way back, and people were very pleased to see have that opportunity to see that precinct, and then of course we went to the site of the new solar farm on the Orange Grove Road, and they were literally gobsmacked by the size of that. Some 800 acres, 300,000 panels and 150 megawatts of power are going to come out of that operation in a couple of months when it's completed. It's had up to 200 people working in installing it. So that was found to be very valuable exercise, and as was of course the dinner that night, the usual cross feedback, and I thank the Mayor for making himself available to welcome our delegates at that particular dinner. Next day we had a very positive meeting with some very interesting speakers with alternative energies suppliers, so that was very informative. So I'd just like to finally to reiterate what I've already said in the report, and that is our thanks to staff members, Ms. McElveen's, Corolla, for their work in ensuring that the event went smoothly.
Thank you, Councillor Hasler. I'll now call for a second to the motion. Thank you, Councillor Hook. I'll now call for a member who'd like to ask a question of Councillor Hasler. Councillor Hook is the second to the motion. Have anything you'd like to add?
Nothing to add. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Be the case, the motion in favour? Against? The motion carried. Now move on to item 14.3, which was the Local Government New South Wales 2021 Destination Visitor Economy Conference held between 26th and 28th of May. It's conference season time of year. And Councillor Hasler, I'll hand back to you as Councillor's delegate at that conference.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'll already provide that report once again with the assistance of Ms. Hoddle, who also was in attendance, and we also had our newly appointed tourism officer, I think that's the right term, Nikki Robinson, who was the presenter, and that was well received. I'll just concentrate on making a few comments on one aspect of the conference, and that was our visit to the Corolla Hospital. I've been a regular visitor there for some time, but it was interesting to see that they, like ourselves, have received significant funding, in their case $5 million from the state government, to completely redevelop the Corolla Hospital site. And they were slightly ahead of us. They had their plans. One of the photos there on page 131 shows you the plan they're doing. They also had, as part of the bushfire, results of the bushfire, received $7.5 million in crowdfunding, which just goes to show how much people really consider the iconic Corolla as important to Australia. So that was it. They have, of course, 150 volunteers, 6 paid staff, and during the bushfires, they catered for over 80 koalas in their hospital area. When we were there, I think there were presently over 40 in the site. There's 20 which will never be returned to the wild. They're on permanent exhibition because they're that badly injured that they can't return and pass themselves. So in conclusion, my conclusion, just to draw you to that conclusion, the message quite clearly came across that now is the time. A lot of people are travelling internally in Australia for obvious reasons. You know, it's gone up. There's $20 billion a year normally spent overseas, with people going overseas, which now potentially can be spent in Australia. People are on the roads looking for things to do, and it's up to regional centres like ourselves to try and target some of that travelling public. And I think obviously we're partly on our way with Corolla. Essentially, as we're building, but it'll be a while before we get there. But there are other things we can do to try and take advantage of that. Which they think will be about 4 years, was the prediction that the speakers had at that conference. A 4-year gap before they go back to probably possibly travelling overseas. So we've got a window of opportunity there. And last of all, I'd like just to say thank you very much to Ms. Hoddle for her companionship and company over there, and being so enthusiastic in terms of her role she's undertaking at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Hayes. I'll call for a member to second that motion. Thank you, Councillor Swain. Now call for a member who'd like to ask a question or speak against the motion. Councillor Swain, a second, if you wish to speak on.
No, Mr. Mayor, I guess just to reiterate what Councillor Hasler said. It's a prime opportunity at the moment with everyone in Australia, staying in Australia, not travelling overseas. What a great chance for us to really get our act together.
Councillors, on now, put that motion on the vote. Against? The motion carried. The next item is notice of motion, question and notes. There are none. Notice of motion, question on notice for our general ordinary meeting. So the next items are enclosed. So I will request the council amend the motion that we move into the closed meeting to discuss the reports in closed. Thank you, Councillor Hook, and seconded by Councillor Fuller. I'll put that motion on favour. Against? That motion carried. Now request all of those in the chambers who don't need to be, please vacate the chambers, and also for those listening online, we will temporarily pause our online presence as we discuss and debate items of a confidential nature, and then we'll return to read out the resolutions of close. Thank you.